this
Yeah,
neighborhood.
you need to leave right now.
This is a private neighborhood. Get out of here.
Our houses aren't safe with you walking around
Get
here.
out of here, trespasser. Hey, turn that camera off. You
Private-
can't record us. This is
Someone
private
call the
property.
police.
You need to leave this neighborhood right now. The white woman's voice cut through the quiet suburban afternoon, sharp and certain. She stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, blocking the path of a black man who was simply walking his dog. Her husband appeared beside her, phone already in hand, filming what they clearly believed would be their evidence of wrongdoing. Marcus Thompson stopped walking. His golden retriever, Bailey, sat obediently at his feet, tail wagging, completely unbothered by the confrontation brewing around him. Marcus looked at the couple calmly, taking in their aggressive stances, their entitled expressions. The phone pointed at him like a weapon. He'd seen this before. He knew exactly what this was. "I live here," Marcus said, his voice steady and measured. "I'm walking my dog." "We've never seen you before," the woman shot back. "This is a private neighborhood. You don't belong here." Marcus felt the familiar weight of it settling over him, that exhausting recognition of what was about to unfold. He was 42 years old, a decorated military veteran, a financial analyst who'd lived in this very neighborhood for 6 years. He knew every street, every corner, every family with young kids who'd stopped to pet Bailey on their evening walks. He'd helped organize the neighborhood watch meetings. He'd contributed to the community fund for holiday decorations. He belonged here more than most. But to this couple, standing in front of him with their phones and their assumptions and their absolute certainty that they were in the right, none of that mattered. They saw his skin color and they saw a threat. They saw someone who needed to be questioned, challenged, removed. Before we continue with what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Stories like this need to be told, and your subscription helps us share them with more people who need to hear about justice being served. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. The husband stepped closer, his phone still recording. "We're calling the police," he announced. "You're trespassing." Marcus reached slowly into his pocket, his movements deliberately calm and visible. He pulled out his phone. The couple tensed immediately, the woman taking a step back, the husband's filming hand wavering slightly. But Marcus wasn't reaching for anything threatening. He was opening his camera app. He was starting to record too. "Go ahead and call them," Marcus said. "I'll wait right here with you." This is where the couple made their first critical mistake. They didn't back down. They didn't reconsider. They didn't take a moment to think about what might happen if they were wrong. The husband dialed. The woman continued her aggressive questioning, demanding to know what Marcus was doing, why he was really there, what house he claimed to live in. Her voice grew louder with each question, drawing attention from neighbors who began emerging from their homes, curious about the commotion. Marcus answered every question with the same measured calm. Yes, he lived in the neighborhood. Yes, he'd been here for 6 years. Yes, he had every right to walk his dog on public sidewalks. The woman didn't believe him. She announced this repeatedly, loudly, performing her disbelief for the growing crowd of onlookers. "You're lying," she declared. "If you really lived here, we would know you." It was a stunning statement, dripping with the arrogance of people who believed the world revolved around their knowledge and experience. The neighborhood had over 300 homes. The idea that these two people would somehow personally know every single resident was absurd, but they didn't care about logic. They cared about control, about enforcing their vision of who belonged and who didn't. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers stepped out of their patrol car, immediately assessing the scene. They saw Marcus standing calmly with his dog. They saw the agitated couple, still filming, already talking over each other to explain why they'd called. They saw the neighbors gathered on lawns and porches, phones out, recording everything. Officer Chen approached Marcus first. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on?" Marcus explained clearly and concisely. He lived at 2847 Oakmont Drive, just 3 blocks away. He was walking his dog, as he did every afternoon around this time. These 2 individuals had confronted him, accused him of trespassing and refused to believe he was a resident. Officer Chen asked for identification. Marcus provided his driver's license, which clearly showed his address within the neighborhood. The officer walked over to the couple. "Do you live on this street?" "We live 2 blocks over," the husband said. "But we walk through here all the time. We know who belongs here." "And you've never seen this gentleman before?" "Never," the woman insisted. He's clearly not from around here. We have a right to question suspicious people." Officer Chen's partner, Officer Rodriguez, had been talking to the neighbors who'd gathered. Several of them knew Marcus well. Mrs. Patterson from down the street confirmed she saw him walking Bailey every single day. The Johnsons mentioned he'd helped them install their new mailbox last month. A young couple with a toddler explained that Marcus always stopped to let their daughter pet his dog. This was the couple's second critical mistake. They'd assumed no one would contradict their narrative. They'd assumed their word, their certainty would be enough. They hadn't considered that Marcus might actually be telling the truth, that witnesses might support him, that their entire premise might collapse under the slightest scrutiny. Officer Chen returned to the couple with information that should have ended the situation immediately. Marcus Thompson was indeed a resident. Multiple neighbors had confirmed this. He had documentation proving his address. He had every legal right to be exactly where he was, doing exactly what he was doing. And the couple should have apologized. They should have been mortified by their mistake. They should have recognized the harm they'd caused and retreated with whatever dignity they could salvage. Instead, they doubled down. "I don't care what anyone says," the woman declared. "He still looks suspicious. He's probably casing houses. You need to investigate him." Officer Rodriguez intervened at this point, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Ma'am, this gentleman has committed no crime. He's a resident of this neighborhood. You've been provided with this information. This matter is concluded." The husband raised his voice. "This is ridiculous. We call you about a suspicious person, and you're treating us like we're the problem? What kind of police work is this?" "The kind where we deal with facts," Officer Chen replied. "The fact is, Mr. Thompson lives here. You don't have any legal basis for your complaint." What happened next would become crucial evidence in the legal proceedings that followed. The woman, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment, turned directly to Marcus. The words that came out of her mouth were caught on multiple cameras, recorded by multiple witnesses, undeniable and damning. "I don't care where you think you live," she spat. "People like you don't belong in neighborhoods like this. This is our community, and we're going to make sure everyone knows there's a problem here." The racial implication was crystal clear. "People like you." The phrase hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Several neighbors gasped audibly. Officer Rodriguez's expression hardened. Even the husband seemed to realize his wife had crossed a line. Reaching out to touch her arm, trying to pull her back from the edge she'd just stepped over. But she wasn't finished. She pointed at Marcus, her finger jabbing the air between them. "I'm going to post this video everywhere. Everyone needs to see what's happening to our neighborhood. We're being invaded, and the police won't do anything about it." Marcus stood perfectly still throughout this tirade, his expression neutral, his phone still recording every word. Bailey sat at his feet, panting slightly in the afternoon heat, completely oblivious to the hatred being directed at his owner. The contrast was stark and would later prove powerful in court. Marcus's calm professionalism against the couple's escalating aggression and barely veiled racism. Officer Chen stepped between Marcus and the couple. "Ma'am, sir, I'm going to need you to leave this area right now. You've been informed that Mr. Thompson is a legal resident. You have no grounds for any complaint. If you continue this confrontation, you will be cited for harassment." The couple finally left, but not quietly. They continued shouting as they walked away, making threats about lawyers and lawsuits and community action. The husband was still filming, still recording what he apparently believed was evidence of some grand injustice being perpetrated against them. They had no idea they were actually documenting their own destruction. After they departed, Officer Chen turned to Marcus with an expression of professional sympathy mixed with frustration. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that, Mr. Thompson. Would you like to file a report?" Marcus considered this carefully. He was tired, emotionally drained from maintaining his composure through the entire confrontation. Part of him wanted to just go home, forget this happened, move on with his life. But another part of him, the part that had served his country, the part that believed in standing up for what was right, knew that letting this slide would only empower people like this couple to do it again to someone else. "Yes," he said, "I'd like to file a report. It's..." What Marcus didn't know at that moment was that this decision would trigger a chain of events that would expose not just this incident, but a pattern of behavior that went far beyond one afternoon confrontation. The couple's third and most catastrophic mistake was about to unfold, and they were going to make it themselves, entirely of their own volition, with no one to blame but their own arrogance and sense of impunity. The woman, whose name was revealed to be Jennifer Morrison, did exactly what she'd threatened. She went home and immediately posted the video her husband had taken to multiple social media platforms. She added a lengthy caption describing her version of events, painting herself and her husband David as concerned citizens trying to protect their neighborhood from suspicious outsiders. She used coded language, dog whistles about property values and safety and the changing character of their community. But the subtext was clear to anyone reading it. The video went up at approximately 5:30 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. By 8 p.m., it had been viewed more than 50,000 times. By midnight, that number had climbed to over 500,000. But it wasn't spreading the way Jennifer Morrison had intended. The comment sections on every platform where she'd posted were filled with people calling out the obvious racism. They pointed out that Marcus had done nothing wrong, that he was clearly just walking his dog, that the couple had no legitimate reason to confront him. They noted the multiple neighbors who'd vouched for him. They highlighted Jennifer's threatening language and explicit statements about people like you not belonging in the neighborhood. Other residents of the neighborhood found the posts. They began sharing their own stories about the Morrisons. A South Asian family described being interrogated about whether they were visiting someone or actually lived there. A Hispanic landscaper recounted being followed by David Morrison for 20 minutes while he was trying to do his job, with David calling the police to report suspicious activity that turned out to be completely legal work. An interracial couple mentioned the dirty looks and comments they'd received from Jennifer at neighborhood gatherings. This was a pattern, not an isolated incident. The Morrisons had been doing this for years, appointing themselves as the unofficial gatekeepers of neighborhood racial purity, harassing anyone who didn't fit their vision of who belonged. But Marcus Thompson was the first person who'd actually filed an official police report about it. He was the first one who'd created a paper trail that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. The viral spread of the video caught the attention of local news outlets. By Wednesday morning, the story was running on 3 different news channels. Reporters reached out to Marcus for comment. He agreed to speak with them, and his interview demonstrated exactly why the Morrisons had picked the wrong person to target. Marcus appeared on camera in a button-down shirt and khakis, Bailey sitting calmly beside him. He spoke clearly and without anger about what had happened. He explained his background, his military service, his career, his 6 years in the neighborhood. He talked about how exhausting it was to be constantly questioned about his right to exist in spaces where he belonged. He mentioned other neighbors who'd experienced similar treatment from the Morrisons. He made it clear this wasn't about one bad day or a simple misunderstanding. This was about systemic harassment based on race. The interview was devastating in its measured calm. Marcus didn't yell or accuse. He simply stated facts and let viewers draw their own conclusions. The comment section filled with support. People shared their own experiences with similar incidents. Community organizations reached out to offer assistance. Civil rights attorneys contacted Marcus to discuss potential legal action. The Morrisons watched all of this unfold with growing horror. Their video, which was supposed to rally support for their position, had instead turned them into viral symbols of racist behavior. Their faces were now recognizable to millions of people. Their names were being shared and discussed. Their actions were being dissected and condemned. David Morrison made their fourth critical mistake. He attempted damage control through another social media post, trying to clarify and explain their actions. The post was a masterclass in non-apology apologies and excuse-making. He claimed they'd been concerned for neighborhood safety. He insisted race had nothing to do with it. He suggested they'd been unfairly portrayed and taken out of context. He blamed the media for distorting what happened. The post made everything worse. People screenshot it, highlighted the most ridiculous parts, shared it widely as an example of what not to do when you've been caught being racist. The attempt at clarification simply kept the story alive and in the public eye, ensuring even more people saw the original video and formed their own negative opinions about the Morrisons. Meanwhile, the police department was conducting its own review of the incident. The officer's body camera footage showed everything that had happened from an additional angle, combined with Marcus's recording, the neighbors' recordings, and the Morrisons' own video. There was an overwhelming amount of documentation of exactly what had occurred and what had been said. The department's legal team reviewed the evidence carefully. Jennifer Morrison's statements about people like you not belonging, combined with her explicit threats to publicize the incident and her pattern of similar behavior toward other minority residents, raised serious questions about whether this constituted criminal harassment under state law. The fact that she'd continued her aggressive behavior even after police had confirmed Marcus was a legal resident and that she'd made explicit threats to damage his reputation suggested this went beyond a simple confrontation into potentially illegal territory. On Thursday, 3 days after the initial incident, detectives visited the Morrison home. They informed both Jennifer and David that they were being investigated for harassment and possible hate crime charges. Jennifer's statements caught on multiple recordings provided evidence of racial animus. The pattern of behavior toward other minority residents suggested this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather part of an ongoing campaign of intimidation. The Morrisons were stunned. In their minds, they'd been protecting their neighborhood. They genuinely seemed unable to understand why their actions were being treated as criminal. David protested that they had a right to question strangers in their neighborhood. Jennifer insisted she hadn't said anything explicitly racist, that people were just being too sensitive. The detectives were unmoved. They explained that harassment laws didn't require explicitly racist language. The context, the pattern of behavior, the targeting of specific racial groups, the threats made to damage someone's reputation, all of this could constitute illegal harassment. They asked the Morrisons to come to the station for formal interviews. This is where things get even more interesting. Jennifer Morrison, still apparently believing she was in the right, agreed to the interview without requesting an attorney, her fifth critical mistake. During the interview, she expanded on her beliefs about the neighborhood, about property values, about the importance of maintaining community standards. She talked about how she and David saw themselves as protectors of the neighborhood's character and quality. With every sentence, she provided more evidence of her discriminatory intent and her pattern of targeting minority residents. The interview was recorded. Portions of it would later be used in court. Jennifer's own words, captured on official police recordings, demonstrated beyond any doubt that her actions toward Marcus Thompson were motivated by racial bias. She tried to couch it in language about safety and property values, but the underlying racism was transparent to anyone listening. David Morrison's interview was similar. He corroborated the pattern of following and confronting people of color in the neighborhood. He described it as vigilance. The investigators heard it as admission of systematic racial harassment. By Friday, less than a week after the initial incident, the district attorney's office announced charges. Jennifer Morrison was charged with harassment and making terroristic threats, both misdemeanors in their jurisdiction. David Morrison was charged as an accomplice to harassment. The district attorney's public statement noted that while these might seem like relatively minor charges, they took seriously any pattern of behavior designed to intimidate residents based on their race. The announcement made national news. The story had everything the media loved: clear video evidence, an obvious injustice, protagonists and antagonists, and the promise of legal consequences. Cable news shows discussed it. Legal analysts weighed in on the charges and their likelihood of conviction. Social media continued to amplify the story, ensuring it reached audiences far beyond the original neighborhood where it had occurred. Marcus Thompson, meanwhile, had hired his own attorney. A civil rights firm had reached out offering pro bono representation for a potential civil lawsuit against the Morrisons. Marcus accepted. The lawsuit, filed the following week, sought damages for harassment, emotional distress, defamation through Jennifer's social media posts, and violation of Marcus's civil rights under state law. The lawsuit laid out in meticulous detail the events of that Tuesday afternoon. It included testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed the Morrisons' harassment of other minority residents. It documented the social media posts and the harm they'd caused to Marcus's reputation and peace of mind. It quantified the emotional distress of being racially profiled in his own neighborhood and having to defend his right to exist in his own community. The Morrisons attempted to fight both the criminal charges and the civil lawsuit. They hired attorneys who filed motions to dismiss, arguing that their clients had simply been exercising their rights to question suspicious activity. The motions were denied. The evidence was too clear, too well documented, too damning. As the legal proceedings moved forward, other consequences began to pile up for the Morrisons. David worked for a mid-sized tech company that prided itself on its diversity and inclusion initiatives. When the video went viral and his name became associated with racist harassment, his employer faced questions from employees and clients about why they were continuing to employ someone who'd been charged with racially motivated crimes. After internal review, David was terminated. The company's public statement cited a violation of their code of conduct and their commitment to maintaining an inclusive workplace. Jennifer had been a real estate agent with a local firm. Multiple clients canceled their contracts with her after the incident became public. Her brokerage firm, facing potential liability and reputation damage, terminated her relationship with them. She lost her professional license after a complaint to the State Real Estate Commission, which found that her conduct demonstrated a lack of the ethical standards required for licensure. The Morrison social circle evaporated. Friends who'd once defended them or made excuses for their behavior quietly distanced themselves. Neighbors who'd previously been friendly now avoided them entirely. They became pariahs in the very community they'd claimed to be protecting. Their finances began to crumble. Legal fees for both the criminal defense and the civil lawsuit drained their savings. David's job loss meant they were relying solely on Jennifer's income, which had disappeared. They put their house on the market hoping to downsize and reduce their expenses, but the viral nature of their story meant potential buyers knew exactly who they were and what had happened. The house sat unsold for months, forcing them to reduce the price multiple times. The criminal trial came first. It was relatively quick, as trials go, lasting just 3 days. The prosecution presented the body camera footage, Marcus's recording, the neighbors' recordings, and the Morrisons' own video. They called witnesses who described the couple's pattern of harassing minority residents. They played portions of Jennifer's police interview where she'd inadvertently revealed her discriminatory motivations. The defense tried to argue that the Morrisons had genuinely believed Marcus was a suspicious person, that there was no racial motivation, that everything they'd done was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media outrage. The strategy failed. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Jennifer Morrison was sentenced to 6 months in county jail with the possibility of early release for good behavior after serving 3 months. She was also ordered to complete anger management and cultural sensitivity training, placed on probation for 2 years following her release, and required to perform 200 hours of community service with organizations serving communities of color. David Morrison received a suspended sentence of 90 days, 2 years of probation, and 150 hours of community service. The judge's statement during sentencing was pointed and unambiguous. She noted that while the criminal penalties might seem modest, she wanted to send a clear message that racial harassment and intimidation would not be tolerated in her jurisdiction. She spoke directly to the Morrisons about the harm they'd caused, not just to Marcus Thompson, but to every person of color in their community who now had to wonder if they too might be targeted simply for existing in their own neighborhood. The civil trial followed several months later. By this point, the Morrisons' financial situation was desperate. Their attorney tried to negotiate a settlement, but Marcus's legal team held firm on their demands. The case went to trial, and the jury awarded Marcus $250,000 in damages for harassment, emotional distress, and civil rights violations. The Morrisons had no realistic way to pay this amount. The judgment would follow them for years, garnishing any wages they earned, attaching to any property they acquired. Let me ask you something. Have you ever witnessed this kind of racial profiling in your own neighborhood? Have you seen someone being questioned or harassed simply for existing in a space where they belong? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you've experienced this yourself, know that your story matters and there are people who will believe you and support you. The long-term impact of this incident extended far beyond the Morrisons themselves. The neighborhood where it occurred formed a diversity and inclusion committee to address the underlying issues that had allowed this kind of harassment to persist unchallenged for so long. They implemented new community guidelines explicitly prohibiting racial profiling and created a formal process for reporting incidents of discrimination. They organized cultural awareness events and brought in facilitators to lead difficult conversations about race and belonging. Marcus Thompson became an inadvertent spokesperson for confronting everyday racism. He gave talks at community organizations about the importance of documenting incidents, knowing your rights, and standing up against discrimination, even when it's exhausting and scary. He emphasized that his calm demeanor during the confrontation wasn't natural or easy. It was a survival strategy he'd learned from years of navigating racism, and that no one should have to develop those skills just to walk their dog in peace. Bailey, the golden retriever who'd been present for the whole incident, became a minor celebrity in his own right. Local news occasionally featured follow-up stories showing Marcus and Bailey on their daily walks, now greeted warmly by neighbors who'd learned his name and his story. The contrast was intentional, showing that the neighborhood could be a welcoming place, that change was possible, that the Morrisons' hateful vision had been rejected by the community. The video of the original confrontation became a training tool. Police departments used it to educate officers about recognizing and responding to racial profiling calls. Community organizations showed it in workshops about bystander intervention and the importance of speaking up when witnessing discrimination. Law schools examined it as a case study in how video evidence and witness testimony could combine to support both criminal and civil legal actions. Jennifer Morrison served her full 3 months in county jail before being released. She emerged to find her previous life completely destroyed. She had no career, no professional reputation, no social circle, and crushing debt from legal judgments she had no means to pay. She made one final attempt to rehabilitate her image through a social media apology, but it was widely viewed as insincere and self-serving, focused more on her own suffering than on the harm she'd caused. The apology video was ratioed into oblivion, with comments pointing out that she seemed more upset about facing consequences than about her actual behavior. David Morrison found work eventually, but at a much lower level than his previous position and for significantly less pay. His name remained forever linked to the incident in online searches, making career advancement nearly impossible. Companies conducting background checks would find the news articles, court records, the endless commentary about his role in racially harassing a neighbor. His professional trajectory had been permanently derailed. The Morrisons eventually divorced. The stress of the legal proceedings, the financial devastation, and the public humiliation had destroyed whatever relationship they'd once had. In divorce filings, each blamed the other for the incident and its aftermath. Jennifer claimed David had encouraged her worst impulses. David suggested Jennifer had always been the primary instigator and he'd simply gone along. Neither took genuine responsibility for their actions. Their house finally sold at a significant loss after being on the market for over a year. The new owners were an Indian American family who'd heard about the incident and saw it as an opportunity to make a statement about who truly belonged in the neighborhood. They were welcomed warmly by neighbors who wanted to demonstrate that the Morrisons' hateful attitudes didn't represent the community's values. Marcus Thompson continued living in his house on Oakmont Drive. He continued walking Bailey every afternoon. But the experience had changed him in ways both visible and invisible. He was more cautious, more aware, more vigilant about potential confrontations. He kept his phone more accessible, ready to document if another incident occurred. He'd learned that his military service, his professional success, his years of community involvement, none of it protected him from being seen as suspicious simply because of his skin color, but he'd also learned something else. He'd learned that standing up against discrimination could make a difference. He'd learned that documentation and evidence could overcome prejudice and lies. He'd learned that communities could change, that consequences could be real, that justice was possible even when it required fighting for it. The broader impact of this incident rippled through the entire region. Other neighborhoods examined their own patterns of racial profiling and harassment. Police departments revised their training on responding to suspicious person calls. District attorneys became more willing to pursue charges in cases of racially motivated harassment. The incident became a reference point, a shorthand for what could happen when everyday racism was challenged and documented. And social media continued to play a dual role in the story. It had amplified the Morrisons' harassment when Jennifer posted her video trying to weaponize public opinion against Marcus, but it had also exposed that harassment to scrutiny, brought accountability, and demonstrated that racist behavior could face real consequences. The platforms where the original video had gone viral became spaces where people discussed racial profiling, shared their own stories, and organized to demand change in their own communities. Years later, when asked about the incident during an interview, Marcus Thompson reflected on what it had cost him and what it had achieved. He talked about the emotional toll of becoming a public figure for racial justice when all he wanted was to walk his dog in peace. He discussed the ongoing trauma of reliving that confrontation every time someone recognized him or brought up the incident. He acknowledged that no amount of legal victory or public vindication could erase the fundamental injustice of being targeted in his own neighborhood. But he also talked about the letters he'd received from people who'd been inspired to file their own reports of discrimination after seeing his story. He mentioned the policy changes that had resulted from the attention the case had generated. He described the neighbors who'd become genuine friends, who demonstrated solidarity, who'd created a more inclusive community. He noted that other incidents of racial profiling in the area had decreased, possibly because would-be harassers had seen what happened to the Morrisons and thought better of it. The Morrisons, meanwhile, faded from public attention. They moved to different areas, tried to rebuild their lives under the weight of their reputations and their ongoing legal obligations. Jennifer occasionally appeared in comment sections of articles about the incident, still trying to defend herself, still claiming she'd been unfairly portrayed, still unable to genuinely confront what she'd done. David remained silent, apparently having learned at least that further public statements would only cause more harm to himself. The neighborhood where it all happened thrived. The diversity and inclusion initiatives continued. The community became more welcoming, more aware, more intentional about creating space where everyone could belong, regardless of their race or background. It wasn't perfect because no community is perfect, but it was better. The incident had forced difficult conversations and uncomfortable reckonings, but those had led to genuine growth and change. This story, ultimately, is about consequences, not just the legal consequences that the Morrisons faced, though those were significant, not just the professional and social consequences that destroyed their lives, though those were devastating, but also the broader consequences of taking a stand against racism, of documenting discrimination, of refusing to let harassment go unchallenged. The Morrisons thought they were protecting their neighborhood. They thought they had the right to question who belonged and who didn't. They thought their assumptions about race and property and community gave them authority to confront and threaten a black man who was simply walking his dog. They were wrong on every count, and their wrongness was documented, prosecuted, and punished in ways that should serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider similar behavior. Marcus Thompson just wanted to walk his dog. He wanted to live peacefully in the neighborhood where he'd built a life. He wanted to be left alone to enjoy a quiet afternoon with his pet. The fact that he had to fight for those basic rights, that he had to endure harassment and threats and a legal battle just to be treated as a legitimate resident of his own community, speaks to the persistent reality of racism in America. But the fact that he won that fight, that the evidence supported him, that the community rallied around him, that the legal system held his harassers accountable, speaks to the possibility of justice when people refuse to accept discrimination as inevitable or unchangeable. So here's my final question for you. What would you have done if you'd witnessed this confrontation happening in your neighborhood? Would you have spoken up? Would you have recorded evidence? Would you have testified for Marcus if asked? Or would you have stayed silent, avoiding conflict, letting it play out without intervention? Think about your answer, because these situations happen every day in communities everywhere, and the difference between justice and injustice often comes down to whether people are willing to stand up and be counted when it matters most. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story if you think others need to hear it. And remember that change happens when ordinary people decide that extraordinary courage is required, that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit, and that standing up for what's right is never optional, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable or scary. Marcus Thompson walked his dog that Tuesday afternoon expecting a routine stroll through his neighborhood. Instead, he got a confrontation that would change multiple lives and spark conversations about race, belonging, and accountability. The Morrisons thought they were protecting their community. They destroyed themselves instead. And that, ultimately, is what happens when racism encounters consequences, when documentation defeats denial, and when justice, however delayed or difficult, finally gets served.